This is the first time I've done a podcast like this where I am talking with an anonymous avatar. I am talking with the Accidental CISO, and this is going to be interesting. So there will be no video of this recording. We are not going to garble his voice, and now I've already laid out some identifiable information, but we're not going to garble his voice as we go through this. And over the course of the episode, I'm going to refer to him as AC and hopefully not out him in the process. AC, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I am doing great. I'm super stoked to do this kind of thing because again, I've not done anything like this before, and I'm really interested in this whole evolution of the anonymous person that's out there in certain areas. And I have this weird belief that many of these anonymous people are the same people in multiple anonymous channels representing different areas of expertise. But anyhow, what made you go the anonymous route?
Uh, Originally, I was looking for basically a place to vent. And I mentioned to a friend of mine one evening over drinks as we're standing around a fire that I had become an accidental CISO. It wasn't something that I had wanted. It had found me and it had followed me. I had left my previous company because I could see the writing on the wall that I was going to own security there. And it's not really what I wanted for myself. And that was at an organization as well that was potentially going to be a target of state sponsored actors also. And it just more stress and responsibility and stuff that I really, really wanted. And so I left there to go to a startup. And that startup was a SaaS provider in the healthcare industry. And so we still had a good, strong security mandate for the platform. But I went there to run basically service operations for them. I had spent a lot of time in my background with IT, infrastructure ops, DevOps, and service operations for web services. So I went there to manage service operations. And within a few weeks of being there, they realized that I was able to parse and understand what the customers were asking when they would send their security questionnaires over during the sales process as part of the customer's vendor risk management processes. And I helped the COO through answering a bunch of these questions, explaining what they were asking, why it was important, how we should be framing our answers. And he almost immediately sent an email to the entire company saying, any security questions, go to AC. And it wasn't long after that they were like, hey, again, they were pretty new in the market and they needed to do a SOC 2 audit. And they had a very large customer as well that wanted them to get high trust certification. And so high trust is a security certification specifically to help with HIPAA compliance and that sort of thing. And it was a fair ask for our platform, but our leadership didn't fully understand what they were getting into when they agreed to do this and signed the contract. So I got tapped to initially help select vendors, auditors to come in and do the audit. And once we figured out, who we were going to use, then the next question from the CEO is, when is it going to be done? And from that point forward, from that question forward, I owned the process of building our security program and getting it audited and certified. And that was solidified in the process where, as we were writing our controls and putting together all the documentation, we had to document who the security officer for the company was. And I made the mistake of going and asking the senior executive leadership team, like, who should we put down for this? And, the COO looked at me and said, well, that's you, buddy. And, I probably swore, had a few expletives that came out and he thought that was rather funny. But, I went back to my desk and finished, with the documents and, sealed my fate at that point. But in the process, I found my place. There was a lot of strange dysfunction and stuff in this startup as well. So, but I was just looking for a place to vent online that, I didn't want to risk getting fired and that sort of thing. But like the job is very frustrating at times. It's important. People understand it's important, but they don't understand it specifically. And when it starts to make folks have to behave in certain ways or follow certain processes strictly, especially in a startup where people are used to moving quickly and whatnot, like leadership has difficulty. Sometimes, we put a policy in place and then they have trouble following it. So there were lots of frustrations with the job. And I created this account. I went home from talking to my friend and I was like, yeah, it'd be a kind of fun Twitter handle. So I created the Twitter handle and, put it up there and started just throwing out some just, shit posting kind of stuff. And it resonated with people uh, to the point where like the follower count started to kind of explode pretty quickly because people would share it. They found it somehow. I don't know if it's the infosec hashtag that I used early on or what, but people found it. It kind of took on a life of its own. And in the cyber community, like going by handles is not abnormal. In the cyber hacker community, what have you, handles are actually very normal. And so people get to know each other by handles and avatars and not always by real names anyway. So that didn't seem to slow down building relationships at all. And, I stayed anonymous for a while. Once I left that role, um, I went and left that to go to do consulting for small businesses. And I left to go help a friend of mine stand up his consulting company that he was working on to learn the ropes of consulting. He had already built and sold a consulting company. So I figured it was low risk for me. I had always wanted to start my own business anyway. So I did that for a year, learned the ropes of consulting, and then went out on my own. But that friend knew me through the alter ego. Like that's how we met. And so when I went there, like he already knew. Like that was the persona that he knew in the first place. So I didn't have to like hide that at that point, um, which was kind of cool. And, at this point, I've got my own podcast and all that sort of thing out there as well. So I don't really hide the identity quite as much as I used to, but it's still fun to keep up the anonymous persona because I can still say things under that are a little more truthy than folks can under their real names about the frustrations of the role, the industry, business, people, all of that kind of stuff that goes together because security it exists at the confluence of people and process and technology and all of that stuff. It's not just a technology thing.
Why do we struggle? Thanks for sharing the story. Why do we
Yeah.
struggle with this whole challenge of venting in public with the risk without the risk of being fired or being let go or offending somebody? Like what's the thing that you've seen out there that makes you kind of, or why do you think we struggle with that?
I know I struggled with it just because that particular employer that I worked for had sort of a history of litigation, lawsuits, and stuff after folks had left the organization. There had been a few folks that had either been terminated or had left on their own and then been sued afterwards. And based on my knowledge of the situation, not necessarily for any good standing other than just to try to get even. So I definitely wanted to kind of protect myself. And even once I had left there for the next, couple years, I still kept a pretty low profile and really didn't stop protecting my identity until that startup had been acquired by another company and leadership had moved on and that sort of thing. And I felt like at that point, it's probably safe.
It's crazy how we hold like grudges or feel like we've got to get
Yeah.
or whatever that thing is. It'd be amazing if people just focused on their job and just move forward, or focused on what's next and just move forward.
Mm-hmm. It it is difficult. I think for a lot of folks, they take a lot of things very personally, um, especially when it's the founder of the startup or something like that. It's easy to take things personally. If you're the manager of a team, sometimes it's easy to take things personally, or if you've built something and put a lot of effort into building something, and somebody comes and critiques it or doesn't like it or what I'm trivializing a little bit with my language here, but
Yeah.
it is very different when you are really deeply connected to something, and somebody, comes and tells you your baby's ugly. It is difficult. And I could see why folks uh, don't take well sometimes to criticism, especially something they're very passionate about or believe in or put a lot of effort into. Um, and I struggle with it as well. But, to your point, it's really important to, commit and align and execute. And even if you don't agree with decisions that are being made in your organization or, what have you, like at some point, you have your opportunity to dissent and, provide arguments and input into the conversation. But once the decision's been made, you got to be able to move on.
Yeah, and it really can be that simple. That whole piece around. I like the way that you framed it around the whole decide, commit, act. Even if it doesn't align with your view or your perspective, here's the reality: you can leave the organization. Like you have a vote, you have a choice, and it doesn't help anybody if you continue to push your perspective throughout it. What is something that surprised you that you didn't expect relative to having the handle version of you out there? What's something that surprised you in the process or in the journey of what you've built on this side of things?
It was it was life changing. And I know that sounds like hyperbole, but it really wasn't. Uh, I found my people. I found my place in the world. I found reassurance that I do know what I'm doing and I'm very good at what I do. And not being around folks that were constantly gaslighting is kind of a loaded word
Sure.
these days. So I want to be careful with that. But like I was in an environment for a long time, actually, a few environments in a row, actually, where I was made to doubt myself a lot. Um, and there was a lot of questioning that I did of myself of like, do I really know what I'm doing? Am I good at this? And finding other people and seeing how this resonated and having conversations with them and realizing like, yeah, this is something I'm really good at. I do know what I'm doing. I have fantastic experience behind me, as well as a very almost like a unique combination of experience as well that ends up being sort of a superpower when everything combined and going with building that anonymous persona. It got me plugged into the community, the tech community, a professional community in a way that I had never had before. And I was able to make industry friends who have become dear friends since then. I started the account in 2019. So it's been 6 years now, a little over 6 years. In that time, like I have met friends and spent time at conferences and stuff with folks that uh, we've collaborated on projects together. We get together regularly on Zoom. A group of us on Friday nights. A lot of times, uh, we'll get together and just hang out and talk about whatever in life. And we got a no shop talk rule, so it's not security. We're just like other personal stuff, and it's enabled me to really build true, deep friendships that I haven't like the kind of thing that I haven't had since like high school or college um, when after school, everybody gets dissipated all over the place. But this is a group of folks that even though we're all over the place, we're connected by tech in a way that's not a barrier for us because we're all used to living online in a way.
It's really cool.
But yeah,
The
it was totally unexpected for me that it would work out this way and give me the confidence to start consulting and start my own business, things that I had dreamed of doing for 20 years. And just never been able to find the right time and have the guts truly to make the leap. And then when I finally did it, I totally YOLO'd it. Like I a single income household, my wife uh, is a publisher, children's book author, illustrator. She has her own publishing company, but she is reinvesting everything back into the company right now and not really drawing an income off of it. And there's not a whole lot of money in books in the first place. And so me jumping off a cliff and saying, I just have to make this work. I got two kids and a wife and a mortgage. And all these responsibilities, and I'm going to make this work. And I did it, and it was wild, but the confidence that I had it gave me the ability to believe in myself in order to do it in the first place.
Super powerful. And one of the things I'm taking away from it too is if you are out there and you're struggling with finding that thing, like you've got that itch that keeps coming up that you want to scratch but don't really feel comfortable scratching because it's scary and it's awkward and you don't want people to be you don't want to be found out, any of those kind of things. This story is one of those that you can apply and you can create a handle. And I never really even thought about it in that context. Because you think about it from a gaming standpoint, you've got handles all over the place that are completely different. And it creates this freedom, this space to go out there and test and do things and be comfortable with taking more chances than you might want to take if your name is associated with it right now. And it doesn't mean that your name can't be associated with it at some point in the future. And imagine the impact you could have if you went out there and tested and did something a bit different than other people might have thought.
Yeah. And I used to joke, I still joke that uh, I'm more me under the persona than I actually am in real life, because that's, anonymous nature of it. I don't have to mask as much. And because it's not connected directly back to me and the other people that know me directly. And masking is a big, being somebody who's on the spectrum, as a lot of people in tech and cybersecurity especially are, masking is something that I do consciously all the time.
Yeah.
And to not have to spend that mental overhead under that anonymous persona has been kind of liberating. And the not have that energy that I have back, like I was able to put that into other things. And yeah, it also has helped me realize that how much I actually do mask. Like I know I consciously do it, but I never fully realized how much that I did. And it's helped me roll back some of the masking in real life when I realized that, like, I don't need to cover up that part of myself. And I can just be me with respect to that. And it's helped me then understand with my kids. My son is diagnosed on the spectrum. My daughter's in the process of being screened. We're waiting right now. We've done the intake and we're waiting on the second appointment for the actual screening stuff. It's helped us with the kids to be able to talk to them more candidly about masking and about who we are and being ourselves and that kind of stuff. So that they don't, God, I'm getting emotional. Think about it. So that they don't have to grow up feeling like I did.
Yeah.
Not fitting in and worrying so hard about who am I? How am I supposed to act in every one of these situations as a child, through school, through college, through work, everything. Like the amount of studying that I had to do to study people and how they behaved in different circumstances. I remember in high school feeling like this great skill that I had was being like a social chameleon because I could blend into drastically different friend groups. Looking back now, like that statement in by itself is practically diagnostic. But it was because I studied how people acted and the social cues and things of each individual group to be able to sort of integrate and assimilate. And yet everybody kind of does that, but not like consciously the way that I had to, or the way that I see that my son struggles to do. So I've really appreciate that, like going through this, that was part of finding my people as well. And realizing that there's a lot more people like me out there. And it's been a huge help for us to be able to help him and have like these conversations where he's crashed and burned and I can pull him aside and be like, that didn't go very well. Here's what just happened. These are the things that, on the spectrum we struggle with. Here, this is probably why that happened. We can talk about, that what he saw, what he was trying to do, and how that, wasn't the right choice in hindsight, what he could have done better, and, what he could have said or what have you. And a lot of this awakening would never have come for me without that as well. So, like, I completely, as you can see, I'm not being hyperbolic about it at all when I say it was life changing.
So freaking cool.
Yeah,
So freaking cool. I'm not employable.
me either.
And there's a period that you go through where whether it's like you said, masking, I think of it as filtering. Like I will be a bit more filtered at first, and then once there's a relationship there, then I will be unfiltered because my view of the world is we're working toward achieving a specific objective, and the objective is the objective. The feelings are not part of the objective. And it creates this tension that can come out there. I I would love to go deeper on this at some point, and maybe we have you back on another
Yeah, sure.
another episode to go through some of this. I do want to shift into the security side of
Uh-huh.
things because another one of those topics that's near and dear to my heart. I was fortunate enough to work in security space for a bit of time. I've had some clients in that space. It was specifically on the human factor risk side of things, like this
Okay.
the human that's in the loop on these things that is um, can create a lot of challenges. And there is this threat. The security threat continues to evolve, and when you're in a revenue role and you're looking at the security uh, checklist that has to get approved on the vendor list, and you're kind of like, look, nobody's ever going to look at this thing again. It's just going to go into a file. Someone's not going to bring it up. Can we just sign it off? Like, what kind of risk are we really taking on, and all of that other kind of stuff? I'd like to hear a CISO's perspective
Mhm.
on why risk matters and why it's important for people to think about risk from multiple perspectives. So, why does risk matter?
Risk in business matters because risk is ultimately where you make money. Like if there were no risk in a business, you're not going to make money because that's what makes the business is you're going out doing something that other people haven't done. So there's always risk in a bit. You're never going to de-risk a business completely. Um, and risk is also important because then you have to manage that risk to make sure that you protect the value that you build. So as you build your business by taking risks in the market, uh, and even just looking at simple loan interest. I mean, the interest on a loan represents risk. It's the money that the lender makes for taking that risk that they're going to give somebody else the money interest. They're going to pay them back. Like, that's a simplification of it, but that's how businesses make money by taking on risk, and they get rewarded for taking that risk. And so we want to manage risk to protect value in the organization. And the more risk you take, you may be able to maximize more profit, but at the same, just like any portfolio, you take too much risk and it can burn you at the same time. So it's about taking those calculated, measured risks. Uh, I think in the security industry, there's a lot of security folks who especially have come up through technical track uh, rather than a business track who struggle with this. And they want to see things as either it's secure or it's not. And it's not a binary yes or no thing. It's about how much risk are we willing to take, that risk appetite, and putting together a security program, a risk management program that allows the organization to make informed decisions for that, uh, for what they're going to do. And so when you're trying to choose a vendor and you send them that questionnaire, they may not have perfect answers on that, but you can look at it and make a decision based on how we're going to use it, the kind of data that they're going to have, the impact that that could potentially have on our business if they had a problem with their service or their product, or if they had a problem with our data. Are we willing to take that gamble to use that vendor? And then, and you've got the same thing then when you're the vendor being analyzed as well. You may not always have perfect answers for those questionnaires that come in, but it's about having a conversation with that vendor and letting the vendor make the decision. Are we willing to accept this level of risk? And maybe if they've got concerns about that, you can have a conversation about what you can do to reduce the risk, either through new controls or through changing the business relationship a little bit. Maybe we don't share all of that data. Maybe we only do certain pieces, critical pieces of what we needed or something. But just changing up the nature of the relationship or modifying controls, you can reduce that risk, maybe get it into an acceptable point. Another mistake I see folks on the security side too make as well is they feel like it's security's job to approve a vendor or approve the risk. It's not, that's an anti-pattern in the field. It's the business leaders, the senior executive team, the business has to accept the risk. The CISO or the security manager, or, whoever it is that owns security in the organization, they can be there to be that trusted advisor to help the organization understand the risk, to help the organization understand what to do about the risk. But ultimately, it's going to be the CEO or the CFO and the COO, like together, they're the organization senior leadership, whoever that business accountable stakeholder is the one that's going to have to decide, am I willing to take this risk to use this project or this product or to do a process this way? And maybe the process is a lot more efficient without some security controls, but that efficient process may be a little riskier. That may not be a problem though, if it's not a critical process that's going to kill the business if it goes down, or if it's not dealing with critical data that's going to create a reportable breach. Or even if it is, you can calculate that in. What's that level of risk monetarily, and versus what do we lose in efficiency by being a little more restrictive in our process? One of the really cool things is you don't always have to trade them, because using computers and tools and technology and automation, like there are ways that you can streamline processes using tooling in really effective ways to help mitigate risk and make the easy way to do things and the fast way to do things the right way and the safe way and the secure way, so that people aren't even incentivized to try and go around it or to, do it in less secure ways. So people think it's some sort of mutually exclusive thing, but if you get creative with this and can connect the people in the process and the technology and understand the business need and the why, you can come up with ways to integrate things and build. Like, I see security as potentially being a differentiator and a force multiplier if it's approached the right way, instead of always just telling people no.
I have two questions on that. The first one I'm going to ask before we get into, so the first question is, what does a good, healthy security conversation look like in a business when you have a COO, a CFO, a CEO, and a CISO, a CTO, maybe even a CIO? You have the C-suite together. What does a healthy conversation look like in that kind of environment?
Looping security in early, or including them in that conversation in the first place, is a good start. I have been very proud of the fact that with my prior employers as a CISO, as well as in my consulting, I've been able to foster cultures where folks will come to me and include me very early on, so that it's very collaborative. And that really is then what that healthy conversation looks like, is it's collaborative. It's not the security person telling them no. It's the security person asking questions, understanding what they're trying to accomplish, why they're trying to accomplish it, why the approach that they've picked or that they're considering is the approach, potential risks to that approach, recommendations. So it's not, no, we can't do that. It's like, yes, but this way. Like, let's consider doing it this way and making constructive, recommendations and suggestions as part of the team, as opposed to trying to be a gatekeeper. Uh, the there was a comic that I read somewhere, and I can't remember who it was or what comic it was. It wasn't Dilbert or whatever. It was some about the security department. So we put the no in innovation, and like all too often, like people hate the security team when they do that because they're an impediment and they just want to avoid them. So, rather than being difficult, be collaborative and figure out how to help them solve their problems. If the CISO or the security team or the IT team in general can worry about solving other people in the business's problems, and the other people know that that's what you're doing and that's your brand, like they're going to come to you and include you and let you help them solve their problems.
When it comes to things that are important to the security professional inside the organization, what's important to you? How are you measured? How do you measure success? Where do you fail? Like those kind of things. What's going on in your head on that side of the table?
It's really difficult to measure the security sometimes because what you're protecting is it's inverted from what you normally would see with return on investment, where you invest the money and you build the processes in hopes that the bad thing doesn't happen. And you can't prove that it absolutely would have happened in order to measure how much did we get in this return because it didn't happen. Uh, so I generally like looking at security and measuring it based on solving the other problems and looking at efficiency that you've been able to help other teams achieve by helping them pick the right tools and integrate the tools in the right way that give you the right information for monitoring. Like the observability piece is a big part of it. A lot of security folks try to go to leadership with metrics of, we blocked this many attacks and we patched this many systems and whatnot. Like the executives, especially like at the board level, the board of directors don't care how many quote unquote attacks you or how many patches you deployed or what have you. What they want to know is, are we keeping our systems up to date within the expected sort of service level agreement that we've set forth? That critical patches are going to be deployed within, 7 days or, whatever that number is. And another tier patches within 30 days. They want to know, are the processes working? So generally, when it comes to measuring the security program, I try to look at it in terms of, we establish this is what we're going to expect, how we're going to expect the program to operate, and here's now how it's operating. And some, GRC tools, governance, risk, and compliance tools can give you like dashboards and this kind of stuff, but they're all very tactical and they don't still flow up to boards and that kind of stuff very well. So I'm looking forward to actually doing a podcast episode of my own on measuring security programs and stuff here pretty soon. So that one's going to be really interesting. I've got a friend of mine that's been a CISO at multiple companies that's going to join me, and she's going to talk about sort of some of the things she's found that have worked well and haven't worked as well with like reporting to the board and that sort of thing on how to measure programs.
When you think about security in the context of the SMB space, what are some things that business owners should be thinking about that they may not be thinking about today to help make this security a security mess, what could be really, really big, how could they simplify it? How can business owners start to simplify a view on security so that they can reduce
Yeah.
risk or potentially improve their awareness of risk inside their organizations?
There's two approaches. Um, you have the risk assessment approach where you look at what do I have? What are the bad things that can happen to it? And then what are we going to do about it? And then there is the framework based approach that looks more at best practices, using frameworks that are designed to the generic's not the right word because it trivializes it. The inherent risks that just exist in doing business and being online these days. We don't have to go through a bespoke risk assessment to know that we really ought to have multi-factor authentication enabled on our stuff. And we really shouldn't share passwords between different employees in the company because then you have no idea who's doing what when because they're multiple people using the same account. Like simple things like that, like those types of things. We have pretty clear sort of checklists on what are the foundational things we should have. Uh, so I think that the approaches for small businesses come down to, you know, am I at a position where it's worthwhile to do the risk-based approach and we start designing custom controls from scratch, or should we start with a framework? And is there a framework that'll work well for us? Um, but it really comes down still for the organizations of knowing what they have, what the value of that information is, or those systems that support processes. Obviously, because the data itself is worthless without a process or something to do something with it, and the systems that are there. So understanding the information and the systems and the critical processes that they're using to generate revenue and operate the business and how those interact, and just like starting there is a good, really, really good first step. Because once you understand that, like it starts to stand out like, okay, this stuff's more, we really have an incentive to protect these types of things or these processes so that we know where to put our initial attention uh, and resources first. Because you're not going to do it all in a big bang. This stuff takes time. When I help customers put together, get ready for a SOC 2 audit or something like that, it generally takes 12 to 18 months for most orgs to go from, hey, we should do SOC 2 to having a report in hand.
Wow.
By the time you figure out where do we really stand, what's it going to take to get there, what do we need to do about it, actually get everything implemented, buy any tools that they may need to buy, get the, allow time to elapse for the auditors to audit, and then have the auditors come in and do it. It's not a fast process. But to put that money into building the security program, even if you don't need to have an auditor come in, where's your best bang for the buck going to be? Where are the things that you should do first? For instance, once you start realizing that the information you have, the critical systems supporting these processes, like you realize like, oh yeah, those are the things that I don't want anything bad to happen to. And, it becomes a little more clear at that point how to start protecting them, especially if you start layering in the frameworks over top of it. Because the frameworks, things like the NIST cybersecurity framework are really, really well suited for small business. And, they're a great spot to start for building a foundational security program.
When's the right time to start building?
That's a tricky question. It should be something that folks should think about from the beginning. But if you're first standing up a startup, for instance, security only exists within the context of the business. And if the business fails because you're too busy trying to build out the security program that you can't, iterate and get your product out there and validate your idea and get something into the market and get revenue started, you're going to have a bad time. Um, I do have one client though that uh, had backing. They had already validated the idea, and they knew that they were going to need high trust certification pretty shortly after launching. And they actually came to me 2 years before launch, before they'd even formed the entity, the business entity. And we started talking about what are they going to need to have in place. But we didn't really fully start implementing until further down the road because we tried to be careful about who they were going to pick to do some hosting for them of the platform and the software development and some of those processes. But at the same time, they needed to have the freedom to move. So we identified what are the firm decisions we have to make that are really difficult to change later, and made sure that the security related considerations were in place there. Uh, and we left other stuff for later. And, you know, it worked really well for that. They were able to launch, they were able to get their first client onboarded, and we were able to successfully get high trust certification. We're actually just getting ready to start their renewal because it's been a whole year since they were certified last. Uh, but there's a lot business owners should be thinking about in the very early days. Just try to get revenue made. Like it's similar to the folks that are like, oh, should I do my LLC and start everything now? It's like, just validate your idea. Like, don't start an LLC for your candle business if you haven't validated that you can sell candles. Again, terrible oversimplification, but it's kind of one of those, put your cart before the horse things sometimes.
Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you really wish we would have covered?
Oh, yeah. I think one of the things too is people do, it's not uncommon when people start doing security to just start doing the things. And they're not being strategic about it. They're not considering the why. They're not considering the importance or the priority of different things. And they don't end up building a cohesive program because they're just doing these different things that they hear they're supposed to do. Some of them are great. Multi-factor authentication. Again, it's the single biggest thing you can do to protect yourself online. Absolutely do that. But as you're looking at standing up a program, there's other things you may not need right away. And it's just looking at how are we going to put things together? There's a good example, I think, using cloud services in a small business. If you're using like Microsoft 365, OneDrive and SharePoint and that kind of stuff, in the security frameworks, they talk about backups. And yes, you should have backups of your Microsoft 365 environment because Microsoft is not backing those up for you in a way that's going to be useful to you as an individual business. They're backing things up from a perspective of like something happens and the entire platform needs to be recovered. They're not backing things up where you can like call them up and say, hey, can you restore, this specific file or something for me? So having stuff backed up is good, but in the early stages of building your program, finding a vendor and setting up a tool to back all of that up may not be necessary if you're a sole proprietor or a very small team and your data is on your laptop and it's syncing with OneDrive. So now you've got a local copy. OneDrive is now your backup. Backing up OneDrive to another service, maybe that's a down the road maturity thing that you get to eventually. But in the early stages, you might not. But, if your, nephew or somebody says, oh, you ought to go get this tool and back up your Microsoft 365 because I was reading that, you should back up your cloud stuff and that's really important. Like, yes, it is. But compared to other things you should be working on, looking at optimizing tooling to prevent errors and mistakes and prevent people from using personal systems to go around other stuff because they don't have the right tooling in place, than worrying about some of these other things that are maybe better left for a more mature program.
AC, this has been an awesome conversation. Where can people go to find out more about what you're working on and to keep track of you?
You can find me on social media, Accidental CISO. CISO, on X and Blue Sky and Mastodon. And I even set up a company page on LinkedIn now for the persona. Uh, the podcast I do is called the Mindful Business Security Show. So if they're a business owner or business leader that wants to learn about security in a small business environment, that is for them. The Mindful Business Security Show is mindfulsmbshow.com for the website, as well as on Twitter and X and Blue Sky and all those places. So the podcast, I'd love to have people subscribe and listen, because I try to make it really valuable and aim it at folks who are trying to learn about security who are not security practitioners.
Follow the podcast. We'll include links in the show notes. If you know somebody who'd find this valuable, please share it with them. The shares help. Let AC and I know via LinkedIn that you've done so, as those connections really help as well. Sales is a thinking process. Business is a thinking process. Life is a thinking process. How are you thinking different?